you're always tempted to buy it, but then you read a bit more about it and you're like, oh no, I won't buy it. So I never actually bought this camera, but I got so close so many times. Today I have two very exciting cameras for you. I've got the Plaubel Makina 67 and the Plaubel Makina W67. Good morning guys, welcome. Matt here from MrLife.com. Excuse any red eye. I'm recording this before doing one of my workshops. It's already well overdue. Thanks to one of my awesome patrons, I got to try out the Plaubel Makina 67. I'm going to talk about the 67, the W67, alternatives to the Plaubel Makina 67, and let you know everything hopefully you need to know whether or not you may want to buy a Plaubel Makina. Stay with me until the end of the video and I'll share some example photos shot with the Plaubel Makina on black and white film during my workshop that I did in Spain a few months ago. A huge thanks to Hide, my patron, for letting me test his camera to make this video, and to all my other patrons for supporting me to help me make this channel possible. So what can I tell you about these amazing cameras? They're actually a Japanese redesign of a German camera which dates back all the way to around 1912, depending on what record you look at. Here's the original Plaubel Makina, designed by Makina & Co. There was the baby Makina and then bigger versions as well, and these cameras were released up until around I think the 1950s. After doing some reading online, it turns out that Doe Group bought Plaubel & Co. and then it wasn't until the 1970s, early 1980s that they released the Japanese redesign of the original Plaubel Makina called the Makina 67, and then in 1981 they released the Makina W67. I will cover both versions, but the camera I got to play with was the Makina 67, which is better suited for portraits. I'll explain more about that in a second. So what are the differences between the original Plaubel Makina and the new Japanese redesign? The two probably standout differences is the new cameras have got their Nikkor lenses, and they've also got an integrated built-in light meter. So the Makina 67 and the Makina W67 are pretty much identical apart from the lens. So let's first cover the spec of the camera and then we'll get on to the different lens options. If you hadn't realised by this point of the video, I probably should have pointed out already, these are not digital cameras, these are film cameras. So these are 6x7 medium format rangefinder bellows film cameras. So let's break that down. So it's a rangefinder camera, the same as say your Leica M camera if you're a Leica shooter. So you get the patch and you line up the patch and that's how you focus the camera. They are medium format, not 35mm, which means you have to use the larger 120 format film. And being 6x7 film format, you only get 10 photos for every one roll of 120 film. So you really need to be a bit more selective when snapping those photos. The Plaubel Makina is a bellows camera, and this is also true for things like the Mamiya RZ67 or RZ67 and the Fuji GF670, both cameras which I've got experience with, and we'll come on to the pros and cons of bellows cameras at the end of the video. The basic difference is it allows the cameras to fold much smaller, which is really good if you want a small compact camera for, say, travel. Like the current production like M6, the viewfinder is parallax corrected and it does have a built-in light meter. Parallax corrected basically means if you focus closer, the frame inside the viewfinder automatically moves so your composition is correct when you take your picture. This is different to say if you use a vintage, say like a 3 camera. If you focus closer, what you see in the viewfinder is not exactly what you get, and say you end up misframing. So parallax correction is a really good plus, especially for users like myself that forget with the older cameras. The built-in light meter has got red diodes in the viewfinder, so very easy to use. You've got a plus, a minus and a 0, similar to many other cameras in the past. The plus and the minus will obviously tell you if you're over or underexposed. You just adjust your settings until you see the red 0, and then you're good to take your picture. The Plaubel Makina takes 2 LR44 batteries, as I say, which power the light meter, but unlike cameras like the, say, Fuji GF670, you can use the camera without a meter. Many cameras from the similar time, they won't work unless there's a battery in the camera. So that's another plus point for the Plaubel Makina. Now these cameras are really nice, but there are some quirks that take a little bit of getting used to. So if you think of, say, your normal camera, let's say you're a digital mirrorless user, you'll set your aperture, ISO and everything on the top of the camera, looking through the viewfinder, and then let's say using a manual focus lens, you'll focus with the lens itself. So you're doing aperture, shutter, ISO on the top, focus on the lens. This is not the case with the Makina. On the Makina, you've got the focus dial on the top, which is the dial around your film advance lever. Very nice film advance lever. This is what it sounds like. And this is the shutter. Beautiful sound. And then all the controls are actually on the end of the lens itself, similar to large format lenses. So you've got the ISO setting underneath on the end of the lens, and then you've got your aperture and your shutter speed on the top of the lens. So yeah, it takes a little bit of getting used to. If you're aware of the Makina 6 or the Makina 7 camera, or let's say the Fuji GF670, these are all leaf shutter cameras. And this is the same for the Makina 67. The Plaubel Makina has a Plaubel shutter with a maximum sync speed of 500ths of a second, and then being obviously a leaf shutter lens, that means you can also sync your flash right up to 500ths of a second. This is really good if you love playing with flash. So it has a hot shoot if you're using triggers and modern flash, and it also has a sync port on the side of the camera. So that's the basics of the camera. Now let's look at the two different cameras. So you've got the Makina 67 released in 1979. That's the first camera, and that was released with a Nikkor 80mm f2.8 lens. Beautiful lens. 80mm on a medium format camera is equivalent to around 50mm on a 35mm full frame camera. Close focus distance of 1 meter. This is your go-to camera of the two cameras if you're a portrait shooter, and this is what you'll see example photos from in just a second. The second camera was the Plaubel Makina W67 with the wide-angle Nikkor 55mm f4.5 lens. This is equivalent to around 28mm on a full-frame camera. This has a close focus distance of 0.8 meters, and this camera was actually made by Makina, as I understand it. If you compare the Makina 6 and the Makina 7 to a Plaubel Makina, there are a lot of similarities in terms of the form factor, the film transport mechanism, and yeah, they just feel a little bit similar. Now I know what you're saying, like, Matt, all this technical info is great, but how do I actually use the camera? So let me tell you. If you hold the camera in front of you, you need to press the red button with your finger and pull the lens at the same time and extend the lens until it clicks, and then your camera is ready to use. Obviously you'll need to put some film on the camera before you can take your pictures. So look at the back of the camera, and on the right hand side there is a latch. Pop the latch to open the film back. You're going to load your film on the left hand side, drag it across to the right. Advance the film until the start line lines up with the arrow. Close the back, advance until it says 1 on the top, and then you're ready to start. Set the ISO depending on the film stock that you've loaded. Set your desired shutter speed and aperture, and then you're ready to shoot. But remember, the focusing is on the top of the camera. When you're wondering where to focus, on the lens itself. When you've shot all your film and you're ready to close the camera, first you need to set the distance to infinity. This is the same as on the Fuji GF670 before you collapse the camera. So set your distance to infinity, then press the red button, push the lens back into the camera until it clicks, and then the lens cap back on, and that's it. The camera is safe to put away. If you're someone like me, and the reason you're probably watching this video is you probably have some interest in this camera. This is one camera that's kind of plagued me over my film years so far, where you're always tempted to buy it, but then you read a bit more about it and you're like, oh no, I won't buy it. So I never actually bought this camera, but I got so close so many times. I did own many alternative cameras, which meant I didn't buy this camera, and so let's cover some of those, and then we'll talk about the pros and cons of the Plaubel compared to alternatives. So I've shot with and or own the Hasselblad cameras, which are obviously 6x6, the Makina 6, which is also 6x6, and then if you want 6x7, you've got cameras like the Makina RZ67, Makina 7, which is also 6x7, and then the Fuji GF670, which offers you 6x6 and 6x7. So because I had those cameras, I didn't then buy the Makina 67, and I'll tell you why. So, pros of the Makina 67. Number one, the size is just absolutely amazing. If you want a small, compact camera, let's say you're traveling and you want to shoot it on high res 6x7 film and you just love 6x7 film, it's very difficult to beat the Makina 67 because of the slim form factor when it's collapsed. If you're a portrait guy like me and you want a fast lens, the Nikon 80mm f2.8 is a fast lens in medium format terms. If you want a small camera and a fast lens, the Makina does kind of set itself apart to other options. You can get 2.8 80mm lenses on other medium format cameras such as the Hasselblad or the Mamiya RZ67. You use the 110mm 2.8 if you like fast lenses. However, if you want a folding camera, normally they are slower lenses. The Mamiya 7 is an 80 f4 and the Fuji GF670 is a 80 3.5. So 2.8 obviously wins over the two other options. Now, what are the drawbacks? The biggest drawback for me was the fragility of the Plaubel Makina for two reasons. Number one, it's a bellows camera, which means two problems. First, you can get pinholes, little holes in the bellows as they kind of degrade over time, which result in light leaks, and then you get light leaks and it obviously wrecks your photos. And then number two, bellows cameras are notoriously more fragile than non-bellows cameras, because if you knock the front of the lens, it's going to knock the calibration out on the camera. So for someone that travels a lot for my photos, I was a little bit scared of knocking the camera out of calibration and or finding one that was in calibration in the first place, obviously if you buy and used on eBay. So that was my biggest negative about this camera. Also, they're quite expensive, and if you're shooting 6x7 film in 2023, the cost of film is now getting more and more and more, and so as you get 10 photos per roll, that's a less economical way of shooting film compared to, say, shooting with a 645 film camera where you'll get 15 or 16 photos per roll. The second drawback for me is I'm less keen on fixed lens cameras. I like using multiple lenses for different situations. So being a fixed lens, either 80mm or 55mm, that goes against my favourite types of cameras. The advantage of the Mamiya 6 is you can have a 50mm, 80mm or 75mm and 150mm, three lenses. And if you buy the Mamiya 7, there's a ton of lenses from around, I think, 43mm up to 200, 210. I did own most of them at one point when trying to love that system. So if you prefer interchangeable lenses, the Mamiya cameras are much better. If you're happy with fixed lenses, you're going to be down to the Fuji GF670 or the Makina if you want 6x7. The Fuji GF670 for me was a better choice because the lens was sharper at 3.5 from lots of research, and also the Mamiya lenses are also sharper. So the nickel is not crazy sharp wide open on the 80mm. If you get the 55mm, it is said to be much sharper. And lastly, the 1 meter close focus distance on the 80mm lens or the 0.8 close focus distance on the 55mm lens, they're a bit limiting for me, if I want to shoot portraits. My choice as a travel photographer would be the W67, absolutely no question. I think a 28mm focal length with a 6x7 camera is going to give you some absolutely amazing pictures. And also you have to worry less about knocking the calibration when you're using a 28mm lens. Let's say you stop down to f8 compared to a 2.8 lens and you're trying to shoot at 2.8 to get those shallow depth of field portraits. Talking of portraits, let's now head to Spain and I'll show you a few photos that I shot during the model photography workshop I was teaching. To my Patreon and student hit a 2-day workshop of model photography and lots of nice cameras. I only shot one roll of film and I was using Fuji A-Cross, which is 100 speed film. And these were my favourite 5 or 6 photos from the 10 that I shot on the roll. I wish I could have a keeper rate of 50% when I shot a roll of 35mm or even digital. Huge thanks again to Hide for letting me test the camera, and he also let me test his Hasselblad X2D, which is obviously a modern medium format digital camera. So if you're interested in that, click this video next.